Dr. Lucas Vance never thought his life would end this way. He had always dreamed of exploring new planets, studying alien life. But this wasn't what he had imagined. The research vessel Astoria was supposed to be a simple mission: gather samples, make some new discoveries, and return to Earth in a few months. But everything had gone wrong. It all started when a strange, unexpected storm hit while they were orbiting an unknown planet. The ship's instruments went haywire, warning lights flashing and alarms blaring. Lucas, who was busy working in the ship's lab, was thrown against the wall as the ship shook violently. He grabbed onto a seat, holding on tight as the Astoria spiraled toward the planet's surface. The crash landing was hard. Glass shattered, and the ship's hull cracked open like an egg. But somehow, everyone survived. Groaning, Lucas crawled out of the wreckage, his head pounding from the impact. His hands were cut, his clothes torn, but he was alive. The others in his team, 2 other scientists and a few security officers, were also alive, though some were injured. They quickly assessed their situation. They were far from their intended destination, and the ship was beyond repair. Lucas could only guess they had landed on an uncharted planet, one that wasn't on any of the star maps they had. They needed to figure out how to survive, and fast. Before they could make a plan, a strange sound echoed through the trees. The jungle around them was thick, dark, and full of noises they didn't understand. As Lucas looked around, his heart skipped a beat. He wasn't the only one who had survived the crash. From the edge of the jungle, several figures appeared, moving swiftly through the trees. At first, Lucas thought they might be other survivors, but he quickly realized these were not human beings. They were tall, with long, flowing hair that shimmered like silk. Their skin was a mix of deep green and dark purple, and their eyes glowed softly in the dim light. Lucas's heart raced as they approached, their movements fluid and graceful. They didn't look scared or confused like he felt. They were calm, focused, and dangerous. One of them, a woman with striking blue markings across her face, stepped forward. Her eyes locked onto Lucas, and he felt a shiver run down his spine. She was beautiful, yes, but there was something about her that made his instincts scream to be cautious. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice like a soft whisper, but with an edge of authority. "I'm Dr. Lucas Vance," he replied, trying to sound confident despite the fear rising in his chest. "We've crashed. We need help." The woman narrowed her eyes, studying him for a moment. Lucas glanced at the others, who stood frozen in place, unsure of what to do. The alien woman seemed to read his thoughts as she took a step closer. "You are not alone," she said, almost to herself, "but you are not welcome." Before Lucas could ask what she meant, another alien woman appeared beside her. This one was shorter, with long, sharp teeth that showed when she grinned. Her skin was a deep shade of red, and she wore armor that glinted in the light of the wreckage. She looked much more aggressive than the first, her eyes scanning the group with suspicion. "Strangers. I do not trust them," the red-skinned woman growled, her voice rough. Lucas's mind raced. This wasn't going to be easy. He needed to think fast. "We don't want to cause trouble," Lucas said, his voice steady, but his hands trembling slightly. "We just need food and shelter. Can we work together?" The first woman, the one with the blue markings, seemed to consider his words for a moment. She turned to the other alien, exchanging a few quiet words in their language. Lucas couldn't understand it, but the tone was tense. After what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke again. "Fine," she said, her voice colder now. "You will work for shelter. Do not expect kindness, human. We will see if you can survive." With that, the 2 women turned and began walking back into the jungle, motioning for the humans to follow. Lucas glanced at his team. He could see the fear in their eyes, but they had no choice. They had to follow. They had to survive. As they walked deeper into the jungle, Lucas kept his eyes on the aliens. They moved with an eerie quietness, almost like they were part of the forest itself. The trees were enormous, their branches reaching high into the sky, and the air was thick with the scent of strange flowers and damp earth. Lucas couldn't help but feel a sense of unease settle in his stomach. What had they landed on? Who were these women? And more importantly, how would they survive this strange new world? It was only the beginning, but already Lucas knew one thing. He couldn't do this alone. He would need every ounce of his skills, and more, to make it through this. The jungle closed around them, and the unknown awaited. The jungle was unlike anything Lucas had ever seen. The air was thick and humid, with the scent of strange plants and wet earth filling his nose. As the group followed the two alien women, Lucas could hear the faint hum of the jungle around them. Whispers of life in the trees, sounds of creatures moving just out of sight. Every step they took seemed to echo, and Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The two alien women, who had introduced themselves as Lyra and Zila, moved with a sense of purpose, leading them deeper into the dense forest. Lyra, the one with the blue markings on her face, walked with a calm confidence, while Zila, the shorter one with the sharp teeth, was more alert, glancing around constantly as though she expected danger from every direction. Both seemed to know the jungle as if it were their home, moving effortlessly through the thick underbrush. Lucas kept his eyes on them, trying to understand the situation. He had no idea where they were, or why they had been abandoned on this planet. But one thing was clear: these alien women were not just survivors. They were warriors. They were powerful. He glanced back at his team. The other two scientists, Dr. Elena Markov and Dr. Thomas Reed, were following closely behind, their faces tense with fear. The two security officers, Grant and Miller, walked behind them, hands on their weapons, but they didn't speak. The weight of the silence hung heavily between them. "Do you think we can trust them?" Elena whispered to Lucas as they walked. Lucas kept his voice low. "We don't have a choice. They're our only chance right now." Elena nodded, but Lucas could see the worry in her eyes. She wasn't so sure, and neither was he. After what felt like hours of walking through the jungle, they arrived at a clearing. In the center stood a large, makeshift structure, built from the thick branches and vines of the jungle. It was not much, but it was shelter. A place to rest. The women stopped in front of it, motioning for the humans to follow them inside. "Stay here," Lyra said, her voice sharp but not unkind. "You will be safe for now, but do not try anything foolish." "Thank you," Lucas said, though his words felt hollow. He wasn't sure if safe was the right word. Lyra and Zila disappeared into another part of the shelter, leaving the humans to their own devices. Lucas motioned for the others to sit down. They were all exhausted, their muscles sore from the crash and the long walk through the jungle. "We need to make a plan," he said quietly, his mind racing. "We need to figure out how to get off this planet." Grant, one of the security officers, spoke up. "How do we even know they'll let us leave? What if they don't want us to?" Lucas shook his head. "We have to take that chance. Right now, we have no choice but to work with them. If they wanted to hurt us, they would have done it by now." Elena didn't look convinced. Or maybe they're just waiting for the right moment. Lucas couldn't disagree with that, but they had to take risks. There was no other option. He glanced around the shelter, trying to assess their situation. The walls were sturdy, built to withstand the harsh jungle environment, but it felt like they were trapped inside. The outside world felt dangerous, unknown, and as much as he wanted to believe they could survive on their own, Lucas knew they needed help. They needed the aliens. It wasn't long before Lyra and Zila returned, both of them holding large bundles of what looked like food. The sight of it made Lucas's stomach growl. He hadn't realized how hungry he was until now. But as they set the food down in front of him, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was too easy. "What is this?" he asked, eyeing the strange fruits and meats they had brought. "It will keep you alive," Zila replied. "Do not ask questions. Eat." Lucas hesitated for a moment, then took a small piece of fruit. It tasted strange, but it wasn't bad. The meat was tough but edible. Elena reached for a piece of meat, but stopped herself. "What are you going to do with us?" she asked, her voice steady but with a hint of fear. "You can't expect us to just stay here forever. We need to get back to our ship." Lyra's eyes flashed with something unreadable, but she didn't respond immediately. Instead, she motioned for Zila to sit. The two aliens exchanged a few words in their language, and Lucas couldn't help but notice the way they spoke to each other. It was clear there was some sort of bond between them, but it wasn't the warm, friendly kind of bond. It was something more complex, perhaps a shared history, or something deeper. Finally, Lyra turned back to them. "We will help you," she said, her voice cold. "But it will not be easy. The jungle is dangerous, and there are things here you do not understand. We will guide you, but you will follow our rules. No questions." Lucas nodded. It wasn't much, but it was a start. They had no choice but to trust them, for now. The next few days passed slowly. Lucas and his team settled into their new routine in the jungle. Lyra and Zila, the two alien women, gave them food and shelter, but it was clear they weren't fully trusted. The atmosphere in the camp was tense, and Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that they were constantly being watched. Every morning, the aliens took them deeper into the jungle, showing them the dangerous creatures and harsh conditions of the planet. Lyra would point out the poisonous plants, the dangerous animals lurking in the shadows, and the treacherous terrain. Zila, ever watchful, would sometimes disappear into the jungle, returning with fresh supplies, always returning with that same cold expression. One evening, as the group gathered around a small fire, Lyra and Zila stood at the edge of the clearing, talking in their own language. It was strange to watch. Two beings from a different world, communicating with each other in a way Lucas could never understand. Yet there was an unspoken connection between them. It was something beyond words, something deeper. Lucas invited, in a way. "How much longer do you think they'll keep us here?" Elena whispered, breaking the silence. Lucas looked at her, his face tired. "I don't know, but they haven't tried to hurt us. I think we just need to prove ourselves to them." Elena frowned, clearly unconvinced. "Prove ourselves? We're stuck here in a jungle with no way to get back to our ship. How can we prove anything to them?" Lucas sighed, rubbing his temples. Elena was right. It was frustrating. He had never imagined that his first alien encounter would be this difficult. The women didn't trust them, but Lucas was beginning to suspect they didn't fully trust each other either. There was something more at play here, something deeper than just the language barrier or the cultural differences. As if on cue, Lyra turned to face them, her eyes glowing faintly in the firelight. "Tomorrow, we will test you," she said, her voice as cold as ever. "A test?" Thomas asked, looking up from the fire. "What do you mean?" Lyra's eyes narrowed, and her lips curled slightly into a smile. "To see if you are truly worthy of our help," she said, her voice sharp. "The jungle is a cruel teacher. If you wish to leave, you must prove that you can survive here." "Survive?" Grant's voice was full of doubt. "You're asking us to fight the jungle?" "Yes," Zila said, stepping forward with a grin that showed her sharp teeth. "Fight the jungle. Fight us, if you must." Lucas stood up, his mind racing. This was a test, but not just any test. It was a test of strength, of survival. He had no idea what they were about to face, but one thing was clear. They had to pass this test if they wanted to have any chance of leaving this planet alive. The next morning, they set off into the jungle once more. This time, however, there was a difference. The two alien women didn't guide them. Instead, they watched from a distance, silent and still. Lucas and his team had to rely on their own skills, their wits, and their survival instincts. They walked for hours, with no sign of the women. The jungle was thick, with vines hanging from the trees, and the ground covered in a carpet of moss and leaves. The air was hot and humid, making it hard to breathe, but Lucas kept pushing forward, determined to prove that they could survive. After a while, they came to a small clearing. The trees parted, revealing a strange structure made of stone and metal. It looked ancient, like it had been there for centuries. But there was something unsettling about it, something wrong. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet shook, and a loud roar echoed through the jungle. A massive creature appeared from the shadows, a hulking beast with sharp claws and glowing red eyes. It was at least 10 feet tall, covered in thick fur, and its teeth were as long as a human's forearm. Grant and Miller quickly drew their weapons, but the creature charged at them with incredible speed. Before they could react, the creature knocked Grant aside, sending him flying across the clearing. Lucas's heart raced as he saw the creature preparing to attack Miller next. Without thinking, he grabbed a large branch from the ground and swung it at the creature, hoping to distract it long enough for Miller to get a shot off. The branch struck the creature's side, but it didn't even flinch. The creature growled, turning its attention toward Lucas. For a moment, Lucas was frozen in fear. He had never seen anything like this before. But then, out of nowhere, Ziala appeared, charging at the creature with incredible speed. She leaped into the air, landing on the creature's back and driving a sharp blade into its side. The creature howled in pain and swung its massive arms to try and shake her off, but Ziala held on, twisting the blade with precision. In a matter of seconds, the creature collapsed to the ground, defeated. Ziala stood over it, breathing heavily but unfazed. Lyra appeared beside her, watching the scene with a calm, detached expression. "You are weak," Lyra said to Lucas and his team, her voice cold. "This is the jungle. This is what you must survive." Lucas's heart was pounding, but he understood. This wasn't just a test of their physical strength. It was a test of their ability to adapt, to think quickly in dangerous situations. Ziala and Lyra had shown them that survival wasn't just about strength. It was about intelligence, strategy, and adaptability. "We'll survive," Lucas whispered to himself, determination settling in. They had no choice but to. The days that followed the battle with the creature were intense. Lucas and his team could barely catch their breath before the next challenge appeared. Lyra and Ziala continued to push them, but there was something different now. The humans were no longer just following. Now, they were learning, adapting. Every morning, Lyra and Ziala would give them new tasks. Some were physical, like climbing the tall trees or building shelters from the jungle's thick vines and branches. Others were mental, testing their ability to navigate the dangerous environment using only their wits. At first, the humans struggled. But gradually, they started to improve. Alina became quicker, learning how to identify the dangerous plants, while Thomas used his scientific knowledge to analyze the jungle's strange creatures. Grant and Miller sharpened their skills as well, practicing stealth and strategy under Ziala's watchful eye. But as they grew stronger, the tension between the humans and the two alien women began to shift. The cold, detached attitude from Lyra and Ziala was still there, but it started to melt, just a little. They weren't showing it openly, but Lucas could tell something was changing. One evening, after a long day of training, Lucas and the others sat around the fire. The warmth of the flames was a small comfort after hours in the jungle. They were silent for a moment, letting the sounds of the jungle fill the air. But Lucas couldn't help but notice that Lyra and Ziala were standing a little closer than usual, their expressions unreadable. "Why are you helping us?" Alina suddenly asked, breaking the silence. It was a question that had been hanging in the air for days, and now Alina had finally asked it aloud. Lyra turned her gaze toward the group, her eyes narrowed but not hostile. Ziala glanced at her, and then back at the humans. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled as the seconds stretched on. Finally, Lyra spoke, her voice low. "We do not help you out of kindness," she said. "We help because the jungle tests all who enter it. We, too, must survive." Ziala nodded, her sharp teeth gleaming in the firelight. Survival is not just about strength. It is about understanding the world around you. Those who do not learn, die. Lucas could see the truth in their words. He thought back to the creature they had fought, how it had almost killed them all. They had survived because of Ziala's quick thinking and because they had worked together. The jungle was not a place for individuals. It was a place where only the smartest, the most adaptable, could survive. "What do you mean by understanding the world around you?" Thomas asked, his curiosity piqued. "We're doing our best, but it's hard to figure out what you mean." Lyra's lips curled slightly, but it wasn't a smile. "The jungle is not just a place of physical danger. It is a place of balance. There are rules here. You must learn them." Ziala stepped forward, her eyes glowing faintly. "We have learned those rules. And now, we will teach you." Lucas couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine. They had been learning how to survive, but now it seemed they were about to enter a new level of understanding. It wasn't just about brute force anymore. It was about something deeper, something that the aliens had learned over years, perhaps even centuries, of living in this unforgiving jungle. The next morning, Lyra and Ziala led them into the heart of the jungle. They didn't speak much, but their presence was commanding. Lucas felt the weight of their silence, and as they ventured deeper, he started to realize just how dangerous this world truly was. The jungle wasn't just full of dangerous creatures. It was full of dangers hidden beneath the surface. As they walked, Lyra suddenly pointed to a patch of the ground. "This is where many make mistakes," she said, her voice cold. "They do not see the signs. They do not understand." Lucas knelt down to look, and then he saw it. At first, it just looked like a patch of grass, but when he looked closer, he saw the faint outline of a hidden pitfall, a trap set by the jungle itself. "This is why we say survival is not just about strength," Lyra continued. "It is about knowledge. If you do not understand the land, you will fall into its traps." Lucas stood up, his heart racing. They were walking on a knife's edge. Every step could be their last if they didn't pay attention. The jungle was alive, and it was constantly testing them. After a long day of traveling and learning, the group finally stopped to rest. That night, as they gathered around the fire, something shifted in the air. It was subtle at first, but Lucas could feel it. A change in the way Lyra and Ziala looked at them. It wasn't the same cold detachment from before. There was something else now, something almost approving. "You've learned more than we expected," Lyra said, her voice steady. "You have proven you can survive here. But the jungle will not let you leave easily. The final test is yet to come." Lucas's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean by the final test?" he asked. Lyra's eyes glinted in the firelight. "You will find out soon enough. Prepare yourselves. The jungle is watching." The fire crackled louder as Lucas and his team exchanged uneasy glances. The real test was still ahead, and they had no idea what it would be. The days following Lyra's words were filled with tension. Lucas and his team could feel the weight of the final test looming over them. The jungle had already shown them how unforgiving it could be, and now they were about to face something even more dangerous. Lyra and Ziala remained silent, watching them with unreadable expressions. The two alien women had always been distant, but there was something in the air now, an unspoken challenge. Lucas could see that they were waiting for something, but what? Every step the humans took felt like a step closer to an unknown danger. They were no longer just surviving the jungle. They were being shaped by it. Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that the jungle was watching them, judging them. The plants, the animals, even the air around them seemed alive with a silent, deadly intelligence. As the group moved through the dense undergrowth, Ziala suddenly stopped. She raised a hand, signaling for silence. Everyone froze, listening. The sounds of the jungle fell away, replaced by an eerie stillness. Lyra's voice cut through the silence. "The test begins now." Lucas felt his heart race as he scanned the area. The jungle felt different now. Darker, more oppressive. Something was coming. Without warning, a loud screech echoed through the trees, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. From the shadows, a massive creature emerged, something unlike any animal they had seen before. It was a massive, four-legged beast, its body covered in thick, armored plates. Its eyes were glowing yellow, and its jaws were filled with sharp teeth, capable of tearing through steel. It charged at them with terrifying speed. "Run!" Lyra shouted. The humans scattered in all directions, but Lucas didn't waste a moment. His instincts kicked in, and he sprinted toward the nearest tree, leaping up onto a thick branch. He heard the creature's massive claws scraping against the earth as it tried to chase after him. But there was no time to think. He had to focus on surviving. From his vantage point in the tree, Lucas watched as the others scrambled to find cover. Elena and Thomas had already reached a thick cluster of bushes, but Grant and Miller were too far out in the open. The creature's eyes locked onto them, and it charged again. "Get to cover," Lucas shouted, his voice hoarse with panic. He knew they wouldn't survive if they didn't move fast. Grant and Miller both sprinted toward a nearby fallen tree, diving behind it just as the creature lunged at them. Its claws scraped against the bark, missing by mere inches. But the creature wasn't done yet. It turned and went after them again. Lucas didn't think. He grabbed a long vine hanging from the tree and swung down toward the beast. It was reckless, but it was the only choice. He landed on its back, slamming his weight down as hard as he could, trying to destabilize it. The creature roared in fury, thrashing and trying to shake him off. Lucas gritted his teeth, holding on with all his strength. It was only a matter of time before it threw him off, but he needed to give the others time to regroup. Meanwhile, Ziala and Lyra had already engaged the creature, their movements swift and calculated. Ziala darted around the beast, using her blades to strike at its armored joints. Lyra, standing still, seemed to be analyzing the creature's movements, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Lucas had a front-row seat to the terrifying speed and precision of the aliens. They moved like shadows, too fast to be caught by the creature's wild swipes. Lyra moved in for the kill, her blade piercing the creature's throat with deadly accuracy. The beast let out a final blood-curdling scream before collapsing to the ground dead. Lucas scrambled off its back, breathing heavily. His muscles ached, and his heart was still pounding in his chest. He had never faced anything like that before, and it had been a close call. "That was too close," Grant said, his voice shaking. He was still behind the fallen tree, his face pale but alive. Lyra and Ziala approached, their expressions unreadable. "You are not ready," Lyra said bluntly, her eyes scanning the group. "You were too slow, too uncoordinated. The jungle demands more." Lucas's heart sank, but he forced himself to speak. "We survived. Isn't that enough?" Ziala stepped forward, her gaze cold. "Survival is only part of it. You must learn to adapt faster, think quicker. The jungle does not care about your survival. It cares only about strength, mental and physical." Thomas stepped forward, wiping the sweat from his brow. "We're not used to this. We've never faced something like this before." Lyra's lips curved slightly, but it wasn't a smile. "The jungle does not care about your past. It only cares about your present." The tension in the air was thick. Lucas felt like he had just failed some kind of test, but there was something in Lyra's eyes, a flicker of something. Was it approval? Ziala nodded. "You have survived, but the real test begins now. Do you have the strength to continue, or will you perish here, like the others before you?" Lucas swallowed hard. The message was clear. They had passed the first test, but there was still so much more to prove. The jungle was only getting started, and the final test wasn't just about survival. It was about their ability to face whatever came next. "We're ready," Lucas said, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped him. "We'll prove ourselves." Lyra's gaze softened just slightly. "Then prepare." The next challenge is near. The jungle seemed to come alive around them, the trees swaying as if anticipating what was to come. The final test had only just begun. The tension in the air was almost unbearable as Lucas and his team stood in the shadow of the towering trees. The fight with the creature had left them shaken, but they knew that their real challenge was just beginning. Lyra and Zeala remained silent, watching them, their eyes like those of predators waiting for their prey to make the wrong move. "We survived the creature," Lucas said, trying to steady his breath. His hands were still trembling from the fight, but his voice was steady. "What's next?" Lyra's cold gaze lingered on him. "You've passed the first test, but the jungle will give no mercy. The final trial awaits. You must prove that you can truly understand this world." Zeala stepped forward, her glowing eyes scanning the group. "The jungle tests your mind as much as your body. There is something deeper here that you must learn." Lucas's heart raced. What could be deeper than fighting for survival in a place like this? But he knew better than to question them. They had already proven themselves time and time again to be experts in this harsh world. "We are ready," Elena said, her voice firm. She had become stronger in the last few weeks, learning how to navigate the jungle, how to survive. But something in her eyes showed that she, too, was uncertain about the next step. Lyra didn't respond immediately. She turned her gaze to the trees around them, as if listening to something only she could hear. Then, without a word, she moved deeper into the jungle. Zeala followed, her pace measured and deliberate. "Come," Lyra commanded, without looking back. "Follow us." The group exchanged uneasy glances before they began to follow. The jungle was silent now, and Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. The trees loomed above them like silent giants, their branches twisting and turning in strange patterns. The path seemed to wend in circles, leading them deeper and deeper into the dense undergrowth. After what felt like hours, they reached a clearing. The air was thick with mist, and the ground was damp beneath their feet. Lucas noticed something strange. There was no sound here. The usual buzz of the jungle, the calls of animals, even the rustling of leaves, was gone. It was like they had entered a different world altogether. In the center of the clearing stood a stone monument, worn with age but still imposing. It was carved with strange symbols, alien, even to Zeala and Lyra, who had seen many such markings in their travels. The stone was smooth, and the air around it felt charged with an odd energy. Lucas felt an unfamiliar weight settle in his chest as they approached. "What is this?" Thomas asked, stepping forward cautiously. "This," Lyra said, her voice low, "is the true test." She gestured toward the monument. "The jungle will give you a choice. You must choose wisely, or you will fail." Zeala stepped up to the stone, placing her hand against it. For a moment, nothing happened. But then, the symbols on the stone began to glow softly. The ground trembled slightly beneath their feet, and a low hum filled the air. The jungle seemed to come alive around them, the wind picking up and the leaves rustling as if whispering secrets. "Stand back," Zeala warned, stepping away from the monument. Suddenly, the stone split down the center with a loud crack. The air around them grew colder and the mist thickened. Out of the split, something began to rise, a swirling mass of light and shadow, twisting and turning like a living thing. It was impossible to look at for too long, the shapes shifting too quickly, but Lucas could feel its power. It was ancient, and it was watching them. "You must face the trial," Lyra said, her eyes hard. "The jungle will show you your deepest fears, your greatest weaknesses. Confront them, and you will survive. Fail, and you will perish." The swirling mass of light and shadow began to move toward them. Lucas felt his heart race, and for the first time, he could not suppress the fear that gripped him. This was no ordinary trial. This was something far beyond physical strength. "You will see what lies within," Zeala's voice echoed, her tone grave. "What haunts you? What you fear most?" Without warning, The mass reached out, its tendrils of shadow and light weaving around Lucas, enveloping him in a cloud of cold. He couldn't breathe. The world around him distorted. The clearing vanished, and he found himself standing alone in a vast, dark space. There were no stars, no ground beneath his feet, only darkness. And then it appeared. A figure, tall and menacing, stepped from the shadows. Lucas knew this figure. It was himself, but not himself. His eyes were cold, empty, and his face was twisted in a cruel smile. It was a version of himself that had given up, a man who had surrendered to fear and despair. The figure reached out toward him, its hand cold as ice. "You are weak," the figure sneered. "You cannot survive here. You were never meant for this." Lucas stumbled backward, but the figure followed. Every step it took, Lucas felt his own strength drain away. He wanted to run, to escape, but the fear held him in place. He had to face it. He had to confront this part of himself. The figure laughed. "You cannot escape me. You cannot escape your own weakness." But Lucas stood his ground. He took a deep breath, forcing the fear away. "I am not you," he said, his voice firm. "I will survive. I will prove myself." The figure paused, its expression faltering. It reached out again, but Lucas was ready. He grabbed its hand, and with a forceful tug, the figure disintegrated into mist. The darkness around him shattered, and he was back in the clearing. The jungle had returned to normal, and the swirling mass had vanished. "You have faced your fear," Lyra said, her voice softer now. "But there are others who must face theirs." Lucas turned to see the others, each of them confronting their own version of fear. The trial was not over. It had only just begun. The air was thick with tension. Lucas stood with his heart racing, his body still trembling from the trial he had just faced. He had confronted the version of himself that had been weak, afraid, and had almost given up. He had fought through it, but now, as the others dealt with their own fears, the weight of what had just happened hung heavily in the air. The jungle seemed quieter now, almost like it was holding its breath, waiting for something. The mist from the trial had vanished, and the strange monument, the one that had opened up to reveal the swirling mass, was now still, almost peaceful. But Lucas knew better. The jungle was not done with them yet. He turned toward the others. Elena was on her knees, her hands gripping the ground as if trying to hold herself up. Thomas stood nearby, his fists clenched at his sides, sweat dripping down his face. Grant and Miller were still in the midst of their trials, but Lucas could see the look in their eyes, the same mix of fear, anger, and determination that he had felt moments ago. Lyra and Zila stood to one side, their faces unreadable, but there was something in their eyes now, something almost approving. "You've faced your fears," Lyra said, her voice softer than usual. "Now you must make the final choice. Only then will the jungle decide if you are worthy." Lucas's heart skipped a beat. What did she mean by choice? They had already survived the trials, hadn't they? "The jungle will give you what you want most," Zila added. Her tone was calm, but there was a quiet seriousness in her voice. "But the choice will not be easy. If you accept what is offered, you may never leave this place." The words echoed in Lucas's mind. What did they mean by that? What could the jungle offer them that would make them want to stay? Was this some kind of trap? Before he could ask, the monument began to glow again, its symbols lighting up with an eerie blue light. The ground beneath them trembled, and a low hum filled the air, just like before. The jungle seemed to come alive once more, as if it were preparing for something. The group stood frozen, their eyes on the monument, waiting for what would come next. Suddenly, the jungle parted. A path appeared before them, leading into the thickest part of the jungle, where the trees were older and darker, their roots twisting like ancient snakes. The path seemed to beckon them forward, but Lucas hesitated. What lay at the end of that path? What would they find there? "This is the final trial," Lyra said. "Choose wisely. Go down the path, and you will be given a choice. But once you make it, you cannot go back." The words hit Lucas like a blow. Once they made their choice, there would be no turning back. The jungle's offer would change everything. But what if it was a trap? What if they were being led to their doom? "We've come this far," Lucas said, turning to the others. His voice was firm, but he could see the doubt in their eyes. They were all thinking the same thing. Was it worth it? Was the jungle truly offering them something? Or was it just another test? "We have no choice," Alina said quietly, standing up. "We have to see this through. Whatever happens, we have to face it." The others nodded, one by one, until the group was united in their decision. They would face whatever came next together. Without another word, they stepped forward onto the path. The air seemed to change as they moved deeper into the jungle. The trees around them grew taller, their branches reaching out like hands trying to grab them. The ground was slick with moisture, and strange sounds echoed from the depths of the jungle. It felt like they were walking through a dream or a nightmare. Everything seemed unreal, but Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that this was the moment that would determine their future. The path grew narrower as they moved forward, and the jungle around them became more oppressive, the air thick with tension. It felt like something was watching them, waiting for them to make their move. Finally, they reached a clearing. In the center stood a massive ancient tree, its roots stretching deep into the earth. At the base of the tree was a stone pedestal, and on it rested a glowing orb. The orb pulsed with light, casting strange shadows on the ground. "This is it," Ziela said, her voice low. "The choice." Liara stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the orb. "Each of you may take the orb. It will grant you one thing, one desire, one wish. But remember, the jungle will take something in return." Lucas stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. The orb shimmered in the dim light, almost calling to him. It was as if the jungle knew his deepest wish and was offering it to him on a silver platter. But what would it cost? What would the jungle take from them? He reached out, but before he could touch the orb, he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Elena. Her face was filled with determination. "We don't need to take it," she said, her voice steady. "We've already proven ourselves. We don't need to trade our futures for some wish." Lucas turned to her, surprised. Her words struck a chord with him. They had made it this far, not by wishes or shortcuts, but by surviving, by working together. They didn't need the orb. Slowly, one by one, the group stepped back. The orb flickered once, then faded into nothing. The jungle was silent, as if it were waiting for their decision. Liara and Ziela watched them, and for the first time, Lucas saw something like respect in their eyes. "You have chosen wisely," Liara said. "The jungle will not claim you. You have passed its trials." The path behind them began to clear, and the way out of the jungle appeared. It was finally over. They had survived, and now they could leave. Not with a wish, but with something far more valuable. The knowledge that they had faced their fears together and come out stronger. The jungle had tested them, but in the end, they had proven themselves worthy. And now, they could walk away, not as survivors, but as victors.